former State Department spokesperson and current congressional candidate Morgan Ortagus, just entering and announcing her run for the 5th Congressional District in Tennessee. Morgan, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. What was the impetus here to make this congressional run at this time?
So really, I sort of looked around and both in domestic US policy and in foreign policy, it felt like everything was falling apart. And I was with President Trump for years in the administration, as you know, at the State Department as his spokesperson for Trump and Mike Pompeo. And, I loved being in the fight. I loved advancing in America First foreign policy. And I think I could go around the world in so many ways in which President Trump got foreign policy right. I think the best president since Ronald Reagan as it relates to that. So we handed, I think, a peace dividend to Biden. We handed him a strong economy, and we have seen him just flush everything down the toilet. And so, listen, I hope President Trump runs again in 24. I hope he wins. But I just thought, I can't sit around and wait for him to win another election. I've got to get in the fight sooner. I've got to do something. And that's really always been, my mantra, something that I've always abided by. I raised my hand. I volunteered to serve in the Trump administration, raised my hand, volunteered to serve in the military and the U.S. intelligence community. And now for the first time, I'm raising my hand to serve the people of Middle Tennessee and to run for Congress.
This is effectively a new congressional district. It's a 5th district, but it's been redistricted and reproportioned. So it was and still is currently a Democratic district, Democratic leaning, but the likelihood is it's going to flip Republican after the redistricting is over. Where do you fit into the Republican political landscape there in Tennessee? How do you find your voter base there? What does the landscape of the race look like at this point?
Well, we have so many great people in Middle Tennessee and Tennessee's 5th District, really strong pro-life conservatives, people who really stand strong with President Trump. And I think that's why President Trump endorsed me, because he looked at the field and thought that I would be the strongest person to carry the America First agenda forward in the Congress and to hold President Biden and Nancy Pelosi accountable. Listen, we're also represented by 2 of my friends, 2 really great people, 2 of the best senators that we have in the entire Senate, Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty. Marsha I've known for years, and she's a friend. Bill Hagerty, when I was at the State Department for Trump, he was Trump's ambassador to Japan. And so I've worked closely with him and with Marsha Blackburn for over the years. I think that Tennessee is very lucky to have them as representatives. And I am really excited for the chance to win every vote that I can and to work with them alongside them in Congress.
Most people who know you, who recognize your name, know you from your time at the State Department as a spokesperson. Obviously, you have a deeper breadth than that, intelligence and treasury, U.S. aid work as well. But as they say, all politics are local. So how do you present yourself to the voting base there as someone who has a knowledge of and can handle local issues while bringing your foreign policy experience into the fold?
Absolutely. So my husband and I joined the local temple, Shereth Israel, Orthodox temple. So we've been going there for the past year and really just started when I moved here. I wasn't thinking about politics at all. I moved to Tennessee for the reason that so many people do, which is a better life for your children. I wanted my daughter to grow up in a place with conservative values. I wanted her to grow up in a place where people aren't censored, where people aren't silenced for what they think and for what they believe. And that goes on right now so much around America. It's actually quite scary that you are silenced for your political beliefs, silenced if you work for President Trump. And listen, when I was State Department spokesperson, I didn't let the Chinese, the Russians, or the Iranians silence me. And as Tennessee's representative in Congress and Middle Tennessee's representative, I'm not going to let anyone silence me there either. And I'm going to stand up for the people here who feel like they may not have a voice.
We're seeing obviously this split, and it's been magnified, I think, over the last couple of weeks within the Republican Party. And some are starting to peel away from President Trump. Now, you obviously, and already in this conversation, have brought him up a number of times. So are you going to be
he was
running?
My boss.
I know he was. Some people want to distance themselves from their bosses. It depends on who your boss is. But do you feel like that, the pro-Trump base is there within your district that you can run touting his endorsement, touting his policies, and feel that's going to be a winning proposition within that district?
I do. Listen, all I see is support from people here in Middle Tennessee for President Trump. In fact, everywhere I go, even before I ran for office, people knew that I worked for him, and they would come up to me and say, "Is he going to run? Please let him know we want him back." And I think that's because people knew during his 4 years that his policies were working. But unfortunately, over the last year, everything has just been so exacerbated that people now see that they have to make decisions that they shouldn't have to make. They have to make decisions at the grocery store about filling up their cart of groceries or filling up their gas tank. That shouldn't happen in America. President Biden treats our southern border as if we're a failed state, as if we're, some country that can't protect itself. And we do have the policies where we can protect ourselves. President Trump had them. We just have to implement them. So listen, immigration is a very strong issue in my district. It matters to me. The economy, inflation, supply chain. This is disrupting people's lives here in Middle Tennessee. And more than anything, I think that my friends and neighbors here that I hope to represent in Congress just want someone who will stand up for them and fight for their conservative values, someone who's not ashamed of them. I'm certainly not. And I want my daughter to grow up in an environment where she can be free to think whatever she wants, to believe whatever she wants. And lately, all we see from the left is it's not that they're just trying to defeat us in elections. They're trying to destroy us. They want to destroy the way we think. They want to destroy our way of life. And I'm going to be just a big Mack truck standing in the way of Nancy Pelosi doing that to my friends and neighbors here in Tennessee.
And you mentioned Senator Bill Hagerty there in Tennessee, first-term senator who jumped right into foreign policy, which is rare for a first-termer. I assume, should you win, you're going to do the same. And if so, what do you intend to bring to the table in terms of foreign policy, specifically Middle East foreign policy, which you handled so deeply there at the State Department?
Well, I think Middle Tennessee will certainly have an interesting representative in Congress for me. I am a mother, a wife, a veteran. I'm Jewish, national security experience, business experience. So I think that there's something in my bio and my background that a lot of people can relate to. Listen, certainly in foreign policy, you and I, you've done many interviews with me. I could go around the world, but let's start with the Middle East because that was so important for me. As you know, I was a part of Abraham Accords with President Trump and Jared Kushner, Mike Pompeo. And it's so funny because when I first started out in my career working in national and foreign policy issues, I always thought and hoped that one day in the culmination of my career that we'd be able to have some sort of peace in the Middle East, some sort of breakthrough that I worked on. I didn't expect it to happen midway through my career. And when we were able to, with the Abraham Accords, get 4 peace deals between Israel and Arab states, the first in 26 years. All of this happened, by the way. I was working on this. I was very pregnant. I had a baby, a little girl, 2 days after the election. And it will be forever ingrained in my memory, sitting in the Oval Office with President Trump twice, whenever he conducted calls in between former Prime Minister Netanyahu and the leaders in UAE and Bahrain and Sudan. This is just, I remember looking around the room and hearing President Trump conduct the call. This is before we had the really big outdoor event that everyone saw. And when we were in the Oval Office, I thought, how am I going to explain to my daughter what the Middle East used to look like before President Trump? I'm going to have to tell her stories about, well, if you wanted to go to Jerusalem and you wanted to go to Dubai, you had to carry 2 different passports. And she's going to look at me and think that's as odd as a landline phone. And that's because of President Trump and the world that my Jewish daughter will grow up in, the world that little, Emirati children and Arab children in Bahrain and Sudan, the world that they will grow up in is that it's perfectly normal to go to Israel for spring break, or it's perfectly normal to see, an Israeli at a souk, in the market in Manama. And for me to be able to be a part of that's exciting, but you just don't, it's not magic, as you don't just get there by happenstance. You get there from 4 years of putting policies in place that were counterintuitive in Washington. Now, they shouldn't have been counterintuitive. Trump's main philosophy was, let's reward our allies and friends and punish our enemies. Now, that shouldn't be revolutionary thinking, but unfortunately, in DC foreign policy establishment, it was. We looked at Iran and said, this is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, designated so by multiple Republican and Democratic administrations. So we're not going to give the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism billions of dollars in sanctions relief. We're going to put the maximum economic pressure campaign on them. When we saw the opportunity to take out the world's largest terrorist and Qasem Soleimani, we did. And I think that is what led to peace in the Middle East, is that we had our priorities right. We weren't afraid to stand up for Israel. We weren't afraid to stand for the law of the land in the United States, which says that the U.S. Embassy should be in Jerusalem. President Trump made big and bold decisions as it relates to Israel that foreign policy analysts, Middle East analysts said for years, well, this will cause World War III. It didn't. What did it cause? It caused peace to break out, because there is peace through strength.
You mentioned the rapid changes in the Middle East, and we're seeing flourishing Jewish communities, open communities in Bahrain, in the United Arab Emirates. You developed for people that don't know, you grew up in an evangelical Christian household.
That's right.
Started dating a Jewish man who later became your husband, and developed your Jewish identity starting in Baghdad on assignment there,
Yeah.
and later converted online, took your online conversion courses while you were in Saudi Arabia, which at that time was definitely not an open place to be a Jew, and still very much isn't. Give us a sense of what it's like as a Jew who essentially became a Jew in the Middle East, to see what Jewish life is like there now, and see those changes. What does it mean for you?
Well, my husband always laughs and says that I'm probably, so ferociously pro-Israel because I am a convert. And yeah, my Jewish identity was not normal. The normal process that a typical converts go through. And in fact, I obviously did my bet din and my mikvah in DC. Came back to the United States for that. But I was in Baghdad on what we call a TDY, which is a short temporary assignment. And you're in a war zone, and you start looking around and you think, maybe I want to find some religion here. And there were Shabbat services on Friday night. It was a very small group of people, but we met in Saddam's palace. And the first time I attended a Hanukkah celebration or a Shabbat service was in Saddam's palace, which we were still in 2007, when I was there. I remember when we lit the menorah, I thought, my goodness, if Saddam Hussein only knew what we were doing in one of his palaces right now. So that was my first Hanukkah experience. And then I came back from Baghdad. I was working in the intelligence community, decided to convert. I started taking some Intro to Judaism classes at the JCC. And then the Treasury Department offered me this job to be their attaché to Saudi Arabia. And my husband, who was only my boyfriend at the time, I said, oh my gosh, I can't take this job. I'm trying to convert. And he said, no, Morgan, you have to do it. So I went to the rabbi and I said, this was 2010. And I said, it wasn't like during the COVID pandemic, doing things over Skype was still a little bit new. So we did my classes for a year every Friday. My husband, who, again, was my boyfriend at the time, went to the rabbi's house and we Skyped together for an hour. And it was interesting because the rabbi said to me one time, oh, I wish that you had an experience, where you were in temple, right? Every weekend. Obviously, I wasn't going to temple in Saudi Arabia. And it was sort of like, oh, I wish you had a more, traditional conversion experience. And I said, wait a minute. If you look at the history and the totality of the Jewish people, I am having actually the most authentic Jewish experience. I'm in a place where I'm hiding the fact that I am Jewish. I'm, when certain people come over, you have to sort of, hide the religious identity. I obviously had diplomatic immunity, so I had a lot more leeway at the time than other people in Saudi Arabia. Even Saudi has changed a lot since then. But I thought even though my experience was unique for modern times, it's certainly not unique in the history of the Jewish people. When we could go back over generations, where we have had to keep the Jewish tradition alive, sometimes in secret. And so that was back in 2011 when I did my bet din and mikvah, and have been a proud American Jew ever since. Proud to have a daughter who is going to grow up to be, I think, a very strong, fierce Jewish woman. And I'm lucky to live in the United States of America. I'm lucky to have worked for President Trump, where hopefully her future is going to be more peaceful in the Middle East because of him.
You talked about your experience in Baghdad, and you met there Sam Vinograd, who's a well-known commentator in America and now works in national security for the Biden administration. You two became close friends. I assume you're still close friends. It's an example of a Republican and a Democrat, very different political spectrums, able to actually have conversations and be friendly. Can that actually occur in Congress nowadays? Can that actually happen? Because we're seeing so much fighting and everything becoming such a political point scoring issue. Where, if you're elected to Congress, do you feel you can work across the aisle and actually find common ground?
Well, listen, democracy can be messy. Of course, people fight because they're fighting for things that they believe in, for the values that they believe in. And I think there's a lot of people that felt for a long time before President Trump and the Republican Party that we were too easy to try to please the mainstream media and try to get people to like us. And I think the one thing that President Trump taught anybody who's running for office or anybody who's involved politically is that you have to stand up to the woke mob, because if you back down, it's never going to be enough, right? They're going to do everything they can until they destroy you. And I think that he really gave the Republican Party a backbone and the ability to stand up for themselves. Something that I'm particularly worried about in Congress when you talk about bipartisan issues is the waning support from the Democratic Party for the state of Israel. It's downright scary, some of the comments that come out of some members of Congress. And so we need more Jewish members of Congress, and that's exactly why I'm running.
Morgan Ortegas, former State Department spokeswoman, now the candidate for the 5th Congressional District in Tennessee. Batzlacha, we thank you for joining us, and we'll be keeping tabs on the race going forward. Hopefully you can join us again down the road.
Thank you so much. Would love to. Thank you.